grab it and turn with me to Genesis chapter 46. We'll be kind of finishing out not only the story of Joseph, but the entire book of Genesis here this morning. I know we didn't look at Genesis as a whole, but we'll see this morning how Joseph's story kind of fits into God's larger story as told in the book of Genesis. There are, of course, many times in our lives when our own personal stories and our own personal histories don't make much sense. There was a novel came out a number of years ago by Paul Murray called Skippy Dies. And the novel focuses on the aftermath of a friend, Skippy, who dies during a donut eating competition. And if you swap out donut for taco, that's kind of how my life trajectory is pretty much headed. So that's but when the friends are sitting around kind of reflecting on their own crises and their own situations, the main character says, "It's not how I expected my life to be." "What'd you expect?" his friend asked. He said, "I don't know. This might sound stupid, but I suppose I want there to be more of a narrative arc. A narrative arc. Like there wants to be some kind of sense to all the different things that go on in our lives. And we want all the details and all the stuff that goes on to align to this perfect story that looks like the movie screen that you see in the theater. But real life doesn't work that way. Real life rarely works that way, and our stories very often are much more of a jumbled mess than a narrative arc. Julie Beck, a journalist, says that no matter how hard you try, no matter how badly you want to, there is no way to truly know the future, and the world isn't really organizing itself to give you hints. And the thing of it is that we look for hints all the time. And we ask ourselves questions, if this happened, does that mean that this will happen? So, for example, if my wife gives me a bad look, does that mean a fight is on the horizon? If my boss gives me a compliment, am I on track for a promotion? If I start forgetting little things throughout the day, am I on track for getting dementia? If my kids get good grades, are they on track for a lifetime of success? If I forget little things, am I destined to get dementia? Thank you for those who are laughing at that joke. Novelist E.M. Forster says this way. He says, "Actual life is full of false clues and signposts that lead nowhere." What if there really is a story out there, a larger meta-narrative, a larger story that we can find our home in? God is good even when our story fails to make sense. And God's goodness will be more visibly seen when we are willing to surrender ourselves and stop looking at life from our human vantage point and see life from God's perspective. As we look kind of at the closing chapters of Jacob and Joseph's lives, we will see how God is orchestrating a story not only for those individuals, but for his entire nation of Israel at this point. So we'll look this morning at how the story wraps up. If you remember the last time, we had wrapped up with Joseph reconciling with his family. And his family was now going to be allowed to live near him in the nearby area of Goshen. They would be living in Egypt, where he would offer them provision and protection. So the brothers go back to retrieve their father. Remember, Jacob has not seen his son now in 22 years. And the very idea that his son is still alive would never have occurred to him, because the brothers just now found this out. They have reconciled, they are going back, and Jacob now has to absorb the news. And there's actually a very brief verse where it says that when Jacob heard that Joseph was alive, his heart went numb. What's that mean? It means that he basically almost had a heart attack. If you remember, he was worried that if Benjamin was lost, he would die. But hearing that his whole family is intact nearly kills him. That's the literary irony here. And so Jacob decides, yes, I'm going to go with my family and see exactly what has been going on with my long-lost son, Joseph. So what I want us to see this morning is three things, starting with this: that God shows his goodness by fulfilling his promises in unexpected ways. What promises in particular? If you remember the whole story of Genesis, in the beginning, God creates the heaven and the earth. A lot of stuff happens. In chapter 12, he begins his work of selecting the chosen people of Israel. In chapter 12, it says this: the Lord had said to Abram, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you. So the original blessing, the original promise, was that Israel would have the land and blessing specifically, but secondly, that the nations of the world, all the families on earth would be blessed through Israel. What our story is going to show us is that God is going to fulfill that promise in wildly unexpected ways in the story of Joseph and Jacob as it winds down. So if you look at chapter 46, starting in verse 1, Jacob is now on his way to Egypt to reunite with his long-lost son. It says that, so Jacob set out for Egypt with all his possessions. When he came to Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father, Isaac, just as Isaac had done, just as Abram had done at one point. During the night, God spoke to him in a vision. Jacob, Jacob, he called. Here I am, Jacob replied. I am God, the God of your father, the voice said. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make your family into a great nation. I will go with you down to Egypt, and I will bring you back again, but you will die in Egypt with Joseph attending to you. Now, just some backdrop here. The last time we saw God speaking to Jacob was when they settled in Canaan as an intact family. That was back in chapter 35. For all we know, God had been silent to Jacob for the last 22 years. And that might be why he's like, hey, this is God speaking, oh, by the way, just so that Jacob isn't confused about the PA system, right? So Jacob is now hearing from God for the very first time in years, and God is now saying that, okay, now Jacob, I'm going to fulfill the promise to make you a great nation. Where? In Egypt. That's baffling for an ancient Hebrew to hear. Because if you're reading this story for the very first time, you hear God making that promise to Joseph's grandfather, Abram, and he says, okay, I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to bring you to the promised land, make you a great nation. You think, okay, so that means that Abram is going to start, cranking out babies, and there's going to be a great nation being built right there in the land of milk and honey. That sounds great. And then all this other junk takes place, and you start to scratch your head and wonder, okay, with all this other stuff going on, how is God going to fulfill his promise to the nation? And again, remember, the people hearing this for the very first time were those wandering through the desert for 40 years thinking, okay, listen, there's lots of great land out here. Why not just settle down over there by the Carl's Jr., right? The promised land matters because God's promise matters. But God is fulfilling that promise not just by having a huge family right there in the promised land to begin with, but by developing his nation in the foreign land of Egypt before sending them back to reclaim that promised land. Remember, the entire nation of Israel at this point in human history would fit inside our fellowship hall. It was Jacob and his family, his kids. Those were the tribes at this point. And remember, by the way, Jacob was the name he was born with. It meant like heel grabber, who grabs at the heels. What did God rename Jacob? Israel. That's where the name Israel comes from. And so this story helps the people of Israel know that, okay, God sent Israel, the man and the nation, into Egypt to begin with. That's huge. And so what Joseph does in the next kind of section is he takes his family before Pharaoh and seeks out permission for them to also live and inhabit in the land. And there is tension in the narrative between the pressure of the Egyptians for the family to assimilate into Egyptian culture and the tension to remain faithful to Yahweh and retain their Hebrew identity in that foreign land. There is a dynamic going on there behind the scenes that the original readers would have had to understand. They could not possibly find their home in Egypt. They had to retain their identity, and they had to eventually look to the original promised land. So in chapter 46, verse 28, it says this: as they neared their destination, Jacob sent Judah ahead to meet Joseph and get directions to the region of Goshen. And when they finally arrived there, Joseph prepared his chariot and traveled to Goshen to meet his father Jacob. Very first time in 22 years, by the way. When Joseph arrived, he embraced his father and wept, holding him for a very long time. Finally, Jacob said to Joseph, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen your face again and know you are still alive." The emotion is literally dripping down their faces. And listen, this is a lot for a dad to absorb, that not only is his son still alive, that he hasn't seen since he was a teenager. He's now a grown man, but not just a grown man. He's not only just alive, he's also a basically prince in the foreign land of Egypt. He's married this woman who's like this daughter of the high priestly caste in Egypt. He's now got 2 grandkids he never knew about before. That's a lot for a dad to absorb. And so what happens next, this is the scene where I mentioned that Joseph is bringing his father and his family before Pharaoh. And so Jacob, who is now the patriarch of all of Israel, is encountering Pharaoh for the very first time. And again, if you're reading this and hearing this for the first time as you're wandering through Egypt, you hate Pharaoh, right? Like, he was the guy that put you and your family and your ancestors under the boot heel of slavery. And you might be wondering, how in the world would our forefather Jacob speak to and interact with Pharaoh? So, verse 11, chapter 47. Then Joseph brought in his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. "How old are you?" Pharaoh asked him. Jacob replied, "I have traveled this earth for 130 hard years, but my life has been short compared to the lives of my ancestors." Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh again before leaving his court. So Joseph assigned the best land of Egypt, the region of Ramses, to his father and his brothers, and he settled them there, just as Pharaoh had commanded. There is, again, a tension between the promises given to Israel and life now in Egypt. What does Jacob do twice here in Pharaoh's presence? He blesses Pharaoh. All the nations, all the families of the world will be blessed through Israel. Joseph had already been a blessing directly through his various actions as governor, and now Jacob, the patriarch of all Israel, blesses the leader of Egypt. We're seeing God's promises coming to fruition. And if you're, again, wandering through the desert, hearing this, you know that if God has fulfilled that promise to bless other nations, so too will he fulfill his promise to bring you back to the promised land. In the meantime, where do they settle down? The region of where? Ramses. History lesson, by the way. Ramses does not exist yet. Do you know who built the city of Ramses? Hebrew slaves. This was a reminder, by the way, that even the slavery that they endured, even the captivity they endured, was a part of the promised plan of God, that there was blessing kind of behind the scenes. Even amidst all the weird stuff going on, even amidst all the hardship, God has not relinquished or forgotten his fundamental promise to him. And Jacob's speech here has this weird pathos about it. He's not exactly bragging before Pharaoh. Pharaoh seems to be asking, I hope I live that long. And Jacob's like, well, think again. Because his life has not exactly been a portrait of consistent blessing. It's been a mixed bag, to say the very least. But he has enough wherewithal to say, I love my family, and I want to bless those who have blessed my family so greatly. So Jacob goes on to live there 17 years, which is not just a minor literary detail, because his son Joseph had been 17 when he was sold into Egyptian slavery. It was a way of helping them remember these kinds of timelines. So after 17 years of living there, his time of death eventually came. So chapter 47, verse 29. As the time of his death grew near, Jacob called for his son Joseph and said to him, "Please do me this favor. Put your hand under my thigh and swear that you will treat me with unfailing love by honoring this last request." do not bury me in Egypt. When I die, please take my body out of Egypt and bury me with my ancestors." So Joseph promised, "I will do as you ask." "Swear that you will do it," Jacob insisted. So Joseph gave his oath, and Jacob bowed humbly at the head of his bed. So basically back then, for whatever reason, like tucking your hand under like the lower back or maybe the rear end was a way of showing respect and pledging your loyalty to that person. And so Joseph is promising his dad, honoring his last request, to bury him not here in Egypt, but the promised land, because he knows that that's where his people belong ultimately. Jacob, even though he's living now with Joseph in Egypt, has not abandoned God's promise, nor has God's promise abandoned him. So in chapter 48, one day not long after this, word came to Joseph, "Your father is failing rapidly." So Joseph went to visit his father, and he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. When Joseph arrived, Jacob was told, "Your son Joseph has come to see you." So Jacob gathered his strength and sat up in his bed. Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. He said to me, 'I will make you fruitful, I will multiply your descendants, I will make you a multitude of nations, and I will give this land of Canaan to your descendants after you as an everlasting possession.'" He's still looking to the future. He's going to die in Egypt. He's going back to Canaan because he knows that's where the nation's future ultimately belongs. He knows that his people have a future, not in a foreign land, but that land that God has promised matters. And so he's setting things up so that eventually his great-great-grandchildren can have a future in the land of milk and honey. Then Jacob looked over, this is verse 8, looked over at the two boys. "Are these your sons?" he asked. "Yes," Joseph told him. "These are the sons God has given me here in Egypt." And Jacob said, "Bring them closer to me so I can bless them." Jacob was half blind because of his age and could hardly see, so Joseph brought the boys close to him, and Jacob kissed and embraced them. Then Jacob said to Joseph, "I never thought I would see your face again, but now God has let me see your children too." Half blind, his last dying wish is to see his grandkids. And then he does something absolutely spectacular. Look at verse 12. Joseph moved the boys who were at their grandfather's knees, and he bowed with his face to the ground. Then he positioned the boys in front of Jacob. With his right hand, he directed Ephraim toward Jacob's left hand. With his left hand, he put Manasseh at Jacob's right hand. Why that order? Birth order, right? Birth order. The oldest gets the blessing. What's Jacob do? But Jacob crossed his arms as he reached out to lay his hands on the boy's head. He put his right hand on the head of Ephraim, though he was the younger boy, and his left hand on the hand of Manasseh, though he was the firstborn. He may have been half blind. He was not senile. Why does he do this? Because for the very first time in his life, he's recognizing that the pattern for his family will be defined not by manipulation, but by grace. The last time that we saw a scene kind of like this was with Jacob himself and his brother Esau, and he was fooling his father Isaac out of the family inheritance. And now the same scene repeats itself in his lifetime, only now it would become a possibility, not through manipulation, not through by heel grabbing or being a con artist, but by recognizing the almighty grace of God. And by doing this, Joseph's sons now become part of the 12 tribes of Israel. You may have been wondering, if you've had a background in church, why we don't see more focus on Joseph outside of this narrative. This is why. Because the real blessing that Joseph receives is that he gets two of his sons are now part of the 12 tribes of Israel. When Jacob blesses Manasseh and Ephraim, he is now putting them as part of the 12 tribes of Israel. And look at this next part. It's so amazingly beautiful. It says in verse 15, "Then he blessed Joseph and said, 'May the God before whom my grandfather Abraham and my father Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this very day, the angel who has redeemed me from all harm, may he bless these boys. May they preserve my name and the names of Abraham and Isaac, and may their descendants multiply greatly throughout the earth.'" All of God's promises are going to come true, he says. But look at verse 16. "The angel who has redeemed me from all harm." Who was the angel? It was that weird dude that he wrestled with back in chapter 32, the angel who maimed him. Jacob had walked with a limp his entire life after that happened. He had been wounded permanently by God himself, because here he actually attributes the angel to the God of his forefathers. He knows that the same God who wounded him is the God who has blessed him, and the God who will continue to bless him through his descendants and through his family. And verse 28 of chapter 49 says this: "These are the 12 tribes of Israel." And this is what their father said as he told his sons goodbye. He blessed each one with an appropriate message. He goes out blessing his family, blessing his children. When Jacob had finished this charge, this is verse 33, when Jacob had finished this charge to his sons, he drew his feet into his bed, breathed his last, and joined his ancestors in death. Almost like Master Yoda kind of a scene right here, right? He's going on joining his ancestors in death, his body left behind. Chapter 50 picks up with the actual funeral arrangements. Joseph threw himself on his father and wept over him and kissed him. Then Joseph told the physicians who served him to embalm his father's body, so Jacob was embalmed. The embalming process took the usual 40 days, and the Egyptians mourned his death for 70 days. Now, out of deference to Joseph, the Egyptians are now in a place of great mourning. And he is embalmed. He's basically mummified the same way they would mummify any body back then in Egyptian culture. It actually would help for the journey back to Canaan, because we're talking about a distance of about 200 to 250 miles just one way. That's a huge distance. And so what follows is they make arrangements for this massive funeral procession to go from Egypt back to Canaan to bury their dad. Again, 200 to 250 miles each way. This is a 500-mile round trip. There is literally no other funeral scene in Scripture this massive. Like even Jesus' friend Lazarus, that whole chapter is a pretty small affair compared to this like royal procession. Chapter 50, verse 12 says this: "Jacob's sons did as he commanded them. They carried his body to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre. This is the cave that Abraham had bought as a permanent burial site from Ephron the Hittite. After burying Jacob, Joseph returned to Egypt with his brothers and all who had accompanied him to his father's burial." There may have been some political pressure behind that move. If Joseph was like the governor of Egypt, it could be the Egyptians were making sure that, listen, now that he's back with his family, let's make sure he doesn't stay there, right? We need our golden goose to keep laying golden eggs, right? That's kind of what they were after. So Joseph had business to keep doing back in Egypt. That's why they brought him back. But again, what we see here is that not only is God fulfilling his promises to his people, but by being buried in the land of promise, they are affirming the fact that God will one day keep his promises to his people. And by the way, just foreshadowing, Joseph too will eventually go back to the land of promise after he dies. The people who are wandering through the desert are carrying his bones with them. They're carrying the body of Joseph back to the land. What I wonder sometimes about that is that when they left Egypt back during the Exodus, they left in a major hurry. Who was in charge of Joseph's bones? Like, who gets that job? Like, who draws the short straw to be in charge? Listen, when we leave, and we have to leave quick because people are dying, make sure you take that hefty bag full of bones over there to take back to the land of Canaan. But we have God showing goodness in the midst of incredible, weird circumstances. And that his promises are going to be fulfilled one way or the other in spite of all the weirdness going on around us. And that leads us to our second point. So our second point is that God shows his goodness by transforming our circumstances for his glory and for our good. We've seen this already in some other passages that we've looked at, but here it comes to the foreground yet again, now that Jacob is dead. Because now that Jacob is dead, his brothers start to sweat a little bit. Because they start to wonder, listen, if our dad is now gone, is it possible that all of Joseph's leniency will evaporate. And so they come to him, this is chapter 50, verse 15. Now that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers became fearful. Now Joseph will show his anger and pay us back for all the wrong we did to him. So they sent this message to Joseph. Before your father died, he instructed us to say to you, please forgive your brothers for the great wrong they did to you, for their sin in treating you so cruelly. So we, the servants of the God of your father, beg you to forgive our sin. When Joseph received the message, he broke down and wept. Now, I don't know whether or not Jacob ever actually said this. It could be that he did. It could be they're making it up, and they're trying to save their own skin still. Either way, Joseph has such a heart for forgiveness, he doesn't care. He doesn't question the story. He extends forgiveness to them yet again. And it says this. This is verse 18. His brothers came and threw themselves down before Joseph. Down before Joseph, by the way. This is like now, I think, the fourth time they've bowed down before their brother. So they say, look, we are your slaves, they said. But Joseph replied, don't be afraid of me. Am I God that I can punish you? You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. No, don't be afraid. I will continue to take care of you and your children. So he reassured them by speaking kindly to them. God fulfilled Joseph's dreams, but not in the way he expected. He expected his dream to be fulfilled back in Canaan, for his brothers to bow down before him, his father to bow down before him in Canaan. And now he's come to realize that all the stuff that he's been through, all the slavery, all the false accusations, the near-death experiences, all of that were things that God was using and orchestrating for his glory and for our good. That is an amazing, amazing promise. And for Joseph to realize that from God's vantage point, that from God's almighty eternal perspective, there is more going on that he does not recognize or see. That is an amazing act of grace and trust in the sovereignty of God. Listen, that is our application point, because God is writing a story for you and for me and for us that is bigger and better than any story that you and I could write for ourselves. Amen? That God's plans for our life are much more significant than anything else that can possibly go on. I'm a reader. You know I'm a nerd. There's a really great novel I would commend to you, though, by Wendell Berry. And the novel is called Jayber Crow. Jayber Crow. It follows the story of a young man named Jonah Crow, nicknamed Jayber. And Jayber, as a young man, has lofty dreams of becoming a minister in some capacity or another. He goes to seminary and doesn't really flunk out, but he just doesn't really fit in there in the seminary. And what God does, seemingly behind the scenes, is that he sends him to this small rural town of Port William, Kentucky, where he's far from the big city dreams, far from the dreams he had as a child. He's far away even from the woman that he just loves but can't seem to really unite with. And as he gets older and he's living there in Port William, serving as a barber to the local community, he's looking back on his life toward the end of the novel and looking back at all the different things that God has done in his life and for him. And he says this. He says, if you could do it, I suppose, it would be a good idea to live your life in a straight line, starting, say, in the dark wood of error and proceeding by logical steps through hell and purgatory and into heaven. But that's not the way I've done it. I'm a pilgrim, but my pilgrimage has been wandering and unmarked. Often, what has looked like a straight line to me has been a circling or a doubling back. Often, I have not known where I was going until I was already there. I have had my share of desires and goals, but my life has come to me, or I have gone to it, mainly by way of mistakes and surprises. Often, I have received better than I deserved. Often, my fairest hopes have rested on bad mistakes. I'm an ignorant pilgrim crossing a dark valley, and yet for a long time, looking back, I have been unable to shake off the feeling that I have been led. That's just good writing. It's such nourishment to our souls. Ever feel that way? Ever feel like your life is not proceeding in the straight line that it was supposed to? I mean, my wife Erica and I were talking even the other day about how unexpected our journey has been. I mean, 5 years ago, we left a home in Connecticut. She was 3 months pregnant. We had no home. We had no health insurance. Our mother-in-law, Bev, who's sitting over here, took us in, and we've made a home here in Madison, Virginia, someplace we didn't expect to stay or to be. And we've been blessed by our church family here, you all here today. It's not the journey, it's not the straight line, it's not the narrative arc that either one of us was expecting. But I'm an ignorant pilgrim, and looking back, I can't shake the feeling that I have been led. Every single one of us has a story, and it might not be the story of Jacob and Joseph and all the different pageantry that goes along with it. But God is leading us along a path, and that path is often circuitous and rocky. You'll lose your boot somewhere along the way. That's just going to happen. But God is good, and he is faithful along the way. And I don't mean that to say that, listen, if you look long enough and hard enough, that everything happens for a reason or some other bumper sticker phrase. That's nonsense. And it's important for me to say that it's nonsense. Not everything will make sense to you in the here and now. Because another quote from J. Burr Crow, he's talking to someone about his future, and he's saying, listen, these questions are hard for me to understand. Maybe it will take an entire lifetime for me to understand them. And his friend says, listen, I'll tell you something else. It may take longer than a lifetime. And it may be that it won't be until we're standing in the presence of Jesus Christ himself that we begin to recognize, listen, this is the way my life turned out, and here's why. That's why it's important to have multiple generations under one roof in every church setting. Because my kids and other young people need to hear from older, wiser adults who say, listen, my life has been a mess, but God has been faithful in that mess. That path I've walked has been not a straight line, but a big old maze. And I am a living, walking, breathing testimony to the goodness of God in the midst of that. And here's where the gospel breaks into the entire story, because the true goodness of God shines through in the midst of Joseph's life and even beyond it. So in the section that follows, we learn about what happens to Joseph ultimately. So chapter 50, verses 22 to 24, says that Joseph and his brothers and their families continued to live in Egypt. Joseph lived to the age of 110. He lived to see 3 generations of descendants of his son Ephraim, and he lived to see the birth of the children of Manasseh's son Machir, whom he claimed as his own. Soon I will die, Joseph told his brothers, but God will surely come to help you and lead you out of this land of Egypt. He will bring you back to the land he solemnly promised to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear an oath, and he said, when God comes to help you and lead you back, you must take my bones with you. So Joseph died at the age of 110. The Egyptians embalmed him, and his body was placed in a coffin in Egypt. That's how the entire story of Genesis ends, with God's faithfulness and the knowledge that that promised land matters. It mattered to their forefathers, and it matters to God. And Joseph's story points beyond itself to the way that God's goodness is shown to us today, that God shows his goodness ultimately through the true and better Joseph, namely Jesus. And all along, we've seen these little hints and glimpses of the way that Joseph's life prefigures the life of Christ. That Jesus, like Joseph, was rejected by his brothers. He was rejected by his own people. He was also cast into the pit by being placed on the cross. Jesus, too, cried out for help, and no help came. Jesus, too, cried out for mercy. Jesus, too, ascended the throne, and from that throne offered comfort and blessing, not just to the Jews, but also the Gentiles and to all people. Jesus, too, offers forgiveness and mercy to those who have wronged him. Jesus, too, offers us blessing and mercy from his very own table. Jesus, too, says, come near, be reconciled to me. You can be part of my family again. Jesus, too, tells those who are far off to come close. And Jesus says that I will one day come back to bless and rule all the nations of the world. Jesus, too, is the true and better Joseph. And you and I today can know that true and better Joseph, Jesus, and find and experience that goodness and know that he is the Savior that we need so desperately. And once we recognize that, once we understand that, once we see Jesus, and once we know for sure that he is ours and we are his, that all the other stuff that goes on in life, that circuitous path that we walk down, that dark and lonely road, starts to look a lot different. Because you never really know what your circumstances will really bring about in the end. If you see life only from your vantage point, you will see every circumstance as a potential negative or a potential positive. And what we should see instead is that, listen, maybe God is at work behind the scenes of my life and working all these events one way or the other for his glory and for my good. There's an old Chinese proverb, more of a parable, I guess it would be, about an old man, an old farmer who experiences different hardships along the way. And so the old farmer had worked his crops for many years, and one day his horse ran away from the farm, and his neighbors came to visit and said, listen, we're really, really sorry for you. This must be a terrible loss. And the farmer says, we'll see. We'll see. So the next morning, the horse comes back. And when the horse comes back, he brings 2 more horses that are now the farmer's horses. And his neighbors come over again, and the neighbors say, listen, you must be so happy that your horse came back with 2 more horses. And the farmer says, we'll see. We'll see. So the next day, his son tried to ride with the new untamed horses, and he was thrown off, and he broke his leg. And the neighbors came over again, and they said, listen, you must be so devastated that your son has now broken his leg. And the old farmer says, we'll see. We'll see. The next week, the Chinese military came to the village to basically do the draft there in the village. And when they came to the old farmer's house, they found the son, who was of military age, but his leg was broken, and he couldn't be drafted. And the old man could keep his son. His neighbors came over once again, and they said, listen, you must be so happy that your son has been spared from this fate. And the old man says, we'll see. We'll see. We've gone through stuff in people in this room, right? We've gone through hardship. We've been fired. We've been divorced. All kinds of weird stuff has happened in our lives. We might say, listen, that must be devastating. We'll see. We'll see. That new baby must be a really great blessing. We'll see. We'll see. Life will work out one way or the other, but not from the perspective that you and I have as earthly mortals. We'll see, and we certainly will see. There will be a day when the curtain is drawn back, Christ returns, and we will see his goodness, his beauty, and his reign blessing and ruling over all people. And on that day, we can finally say, we see. Father, give us hope, give us the wisdom, give us the clarity to see life from your perspective and from your vantage point. Help us to relinquish our grip on our own stories and instead fall deeply in love with the story that you've been telling from the very beginning, that your promises will one day be fulfilled for your people as well as for us. Give us hope. Give us just the stick-to-itiveness to maintain our focus on you and your kingdom, even amidst all the falling and crumbling empires of our present world. Lord, bless us today at our fellowship and help us to be people who are ambassadors for your story and tell your story to everyone we meet. We ask all these things in your Son's name and by your Spirit's power.